Good evening, I'm David Kramer with the National Weather Service and Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area, or call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. I do want to point out again today that we will be joined again by meteorologist Joel Curtis for the aviation section, so we can look forward to seeing him a little bit later on. Starting off for today, we don't have any watches, warnings, or advisories out for the state at present, but do check the website for any updates to that. But I do want to point out some of the temperatures that we're going to be seeing as we move towards the weekend. So we're going to go over temperatures a little bit later as well, but this is going to give us a little bit further look into the weekend time frame. This is specifically for interior Alaska. We're looking around the Fairbanks area here. These are lows for Thursday morning, and we're going to watch the trend as we step forward through time at how much colder these are going to get. So right now, we're expecting temperatures around Fairbanks to drop down to about minus 10 degrees, and that's going to be for Thursday morning. As we move into Friday morning, dropping down around 16 or minus 17 degrees, with Tanana dropping down to minus 22 degrees. And then finally, as we move into Saturday, we are expecting temperatures to drop well into the negative 20s for areas around the interior, such as Fairbanks, Tanana, and Circle, as well as at Eagle and Tok. And some other areas in the negative teens throughout much of the interior are going to drop down quite a bit. We're looking at those colder temperatures coming in through the end of the weekend into the weekend. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, we'll start off with our system out west. We do have the main parent low south of the western Aleutian Islands, but we have a new low forming off the boundary right now. You can see where that's happening right by the Adak area. Some of the cloud cover and precipitation with that system moving in over the Aleutian Islands and out over much of the western and southern portions of the Bering Sea. Out over the Gulf waters, we do have one weaker low out by Kodiak Island area, with another low headed up towards the eastern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, bringing some cloud cover out over the Panhandle. And finally, we do have some cloud cover and lighter precipitation out over much of the interior, especially as we get to some of those more eastern locations where we have that cloud cover stretching down from the northeastern coastline down into the Fairbanks area. For our weather for the remainder of the day, we'll start off with our western system, where we have our main low out by the western Aleutians with that new low that formed off the old boundary, pushing in towards the central Aleutian Islands, and we're going to see a mixture of rain and snow throughout the central and western Aleutians, with some of the warmer air coming up from the south with this system. Out ahead of it, we do have some stronger winds and some snow out for the southern and western portions of the Bering Sea, not quite making it to the Pribilof Islands as of yet. Out over mainland Alaska, we're going to see some snow extending from south central area through the interior, Brooks Range, and Arctic coastline. And up along the Arctic coastline, we are expecting that snow to be accompanied with some areas of fog, and then some areas of lighter snow down through the west coast of the state into the Yukon Delta area. Out over the Gulf of Alaska, we have the two low pressure systems out there, with the more eastern one bringing up a push of warmer air, bringing some rain to the North Gulf coastline, mixing in with snow, especially as we get farther to the west along the coastline, and then a rain and snow mix for the Panhandle, where as usual with this southerly flow, we're going to see a lot more rain at low-lying areas, and as we get into higher elevations and areas farther to the north, expecting that to be primarily snow. As we move into the nighttime hours, that low is going to push up further into the eastern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, bringing continued rain-snow mix to the Panhandle area, with continued rain at the low-lying areas, and then more snow as we get to higher elevations in areas farther north. We're also going to see that rain-snow mix along much of the North Gulf Coast and becoming more snow as we get closer towards Prince William Sound. Then we'll have snow extending up through much of the higher elevation areas of south central Alaska, as well as into the interior and through the western portions of the Arctic coastline, where we'll see continued fog along all of the Arctic coast. Down the west coast of the state, continued areas of snow, and then we'll see more snow out in the Bering Sea that's going to extend further to the north and to the east as the system that was by the central Aleutians pushes more into the Bering Sea. This will bring some snow and some stronger winds out of a southerly direction out over the Pribilof Islands, as well as some areas of snow reaching into the Alaska Peninsula. Behind this system, we are going to see a mix of rain and snow for all of the Aleutian Islands, with some of that warmer air still mixing in from the south. On Thursday, the system will continue to bring a rain and snow mix to the Aleutian Islands, with the front pushing more into the Bering Sea, allowing the snow line to push further to the east, not quite making it to southwest Alaska, however. We'll see rain and snow mix extending into the Alaska Peninsula as well, with more snow as we get further to the east in the peninsula. Out over mainland Alaska, we'll have some snow remaining over the northwestern portions of the state, extending down into the interior and some of the mountain ranges around south central Alaska. Also along the Arctic coastline, we do have some areas of fog extending out east towards the Kaktovik area. Then down in the eastern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, our low pressure is still bringing some precipitation to the Panhandle area, with more rain as we get closer towards the Gulf and at low-lying areas, with more snow once again at higher elevations and further to the north. Finally, on Friday, we have a new system coming up from the south that's going to bring more rain and warmer air to the Alaska Peninsula and areas from Kodiak Island into the Gulf of Alaska. This is going to result in a rain snow mix for the eastern Aleutians, much of the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, into the Gulf of Alaska, and into the Panhandle area as well, with more southerly flow on the way. Low-lying areas will still see more rain, and we'll see some more snow at the peaks and further to the north. Much of this precipitation will be just off the coastline of south central Alaska. However, the eastern portions of Kenai Peninsula will see some snow. Much of the rest of mainland Alaska, however, should be fairly dry, with some lighter snow up in the interior portions of the state. Some fog is still expected along the Arctic coastline as that high pressure is just hunkered down over the Arctic Ocean, and then we'll see some areas of blowing snow develop for St. Lawrence Island and the Yukon Delta area. Low pressure out over the eastern portion of the Bering Sea is going to bring a rain snow mix to much of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, extending out over the Pribilof Islands as well, with more snow farther to the north. For our low temperatures, you will see these different maps that we are testing out right now. Once again, if you have feedback on these, if you prefer the old maps or you do like these more zoomed in maps with some of the bigger temperature numbers, please let us know. You can email me at david.kramer@noaa.gov. That's again david.kramer@noaa.gov. However, I should mention that over the next several days, we'll probably see a lot more of the statewide views, as we are just testing these right now, and it's not a permanent feature of the show at this time. So getting into the temperature forecast out over the Panhandle area for Thursday morning, we do have temperatures dropping down into the 30s, with some areas such as Sitka and other areas near the Gulf staying a little bit warmer. In south central Alaska, temperatures in interior locations dropping down into the teens and in the 20s along the coastline, with Glen Allen being a little bit colder, dropping down to -2. In the interior, we're going to see most locations down below zero, with some of the coldest out in the western interior locations, such as McGrath and Galena. Up along the Arctic coastline, still below zero as well. Then as we drop down the west coast of the state, some places out by Wales and down by St. Lawrence Island should stay above zero. Down in southeastern Alaska, interior locations will see below zero temperatures, and then near the water, we will see temperatures stay just above zero. Down in the Aleutian Islands, dropping down into the lower 30s, and then 28 for St. Paul. For high temperatures Thursday afternoon, temperatures in the Panhandle getting up into the 30s, with 40s for southern locations and areas near the Gulf like Sitka. For south central Alaska, most locations getting up into the 20s, with Valdez getting up to 30 degrees, as well as Kodiak getting to 30. Then in the interior, several locations in the interior are going to stay below zero, especially as we move further out to the west, and that's going to be true along the west coast as well, with several other locations getting just above zero into those lower single digits. Along the west coast of the state, getting up into the teens for Wales at 14, and then 20 for Gamble. Down in southeast or southwest Alaska, interior locations getting up to just about zero, and then we're going to be in around 10 degrees for areas around Bristol Bay, and then in the 40s for the Aleutian Islands, with Shemya staying a little bit cooler there at 37 degrees. Lows for Friday morning dropping down into the 30s for the Panhandle area. Northern locations like Haines and Yakutat going to drop down to 27 degrees. Single digits for much of the interior locations of South Central, with teens along the Gulf coastline. In the interior, dropping well below zero at most locations, with Galena dropping down to -30 degrees, below zero along the Arctic coastline as well, and only St. Lawrence Island staying above zero. Down in southwest Alaska, dropping down below zero for most locations as well, near the coastline right around zero, with Nunavik Island dropping down to 8 degrees. In the mid-30s for the Aleutian Islands, with 32 for St. Paul. High temperatures for Friday afternoon, getting up into the 30s for much of the Panhandle area, into the teens for interior locations of South Central, 20s along the coastline, and 35 for Kodiak Island. In the interior and Arctic coastline, staying below zero for most locations until we get further to the west, where we will still see some single digits, and 21 for Gamble. Then down in the southwestern portions of the state, single digits for many locations, but the Aleutians will be around 40 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hi everyone, this is meteorologist Joel Curtis with your aviation weather today. For Thursday morning, an extensive area of IFR along the Arctic coast, also extending all the way down to the Alaska Range. Also, we see some IFR moving into the Bering Sea, approaching the Pribilofs and over the eastern Aleutians. Also, there's a little bit of IFR over the northern sections of the Panhandle. On Thursday afternoon, that IFR in the east has receded just a little bit over Glacier Bay. Also, we have some along the North Arctic coast and extending down into the central interior. On Friday morning, we have that same area of IFR associated with the strong weather system out west as approached St. Matthew Island. Also, we still have a little bit over the central interior and the eastern Brooks Range, and also northern southeast Alaska. On Friday afternoon, mostly a lot of good flying weather for the state of Alaska, a little bit of IFR over the upper Yukon area, and IFR for northern southeast Alaska. For our pass conditions on Thursday, AKwx Pass, IFR. Adigan Pass, marginal VFR, dropping down into IFR. Lake Clark Pass, marginal VFR, improving to VFR, and also the same with Merrill. For Rainy Pass, marginal VFR, improving to VFR. For Windy Pass, IFR, improving to marginal VFR. Isabel Pass, IFR, improving to marginal VFR. Mentassa Pass, marginal VFR all day Thursday. Tanita Pass, marginal VFR. And Portage, marginal VFR all day. Chilkoot Pass and White Pass, both IFR for all day Thursday. Our freezing levels, we see that our freezing level is at the surface for the vast majority of the state. A little bit of 2,000 foot level over Prince of Wales Island, and you can see the warm air moving up toward the eastern Aleutians. For icing, a rather complex situation, a little bit of isolated moderate icing over a lot of the state below 2,000 feet. However, we do have considerable moderate stretching along the coast from the Copper River Delta all the way down to Haida Gwaii, and that'll be between 3,000 and 8,000 feet. The remainder of the Panhandle will still have isolated moderate icing below 3,000 feet, as well as the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula and on up into the Bering Sea. You'll see a couple of bands of considerable moderate icing associated with that strong weather system in the western Aleutians between 3,000 and 8,000 feet. Our jet stream starts out over Norton Sound up to 125 knots and goes over south central Alaska. A little bit of 55 knots moving onshore into western Canada. Also 105 knots over the central Aleutians out of the south. For our 9,000 foot winds on Thursday, the winds are really responding to a lot of circulation systems. For that strong weather system out in the west, we have 70 knots crossing the eastern Aleutians and on up into the Bering Sea. A little bit of 55 knots out over the Gulf. For the Bering Strait, we see 45 knots out of the north, as well as 30 knots over the southwest, and a southerly 35 knots over the central interior, 45 knots out of the south-southeast over the Panhandle. And 3,000 foot winds, a low-level jet over most of the Bering Sea and the Pacific side associated with that strong weather system. We also have 30 knots out of the north coming down over the Seward Peninsula, and we have southeast winds 60 offshore from the Panhandle and 45 over the Panhandle. And our turbulence, we have isolated moderate turbulence with that strong weather system below 4,000 feet in the Bering Sea area and the Aleutians. A little bit of below 2,000 feet, considerable moderate over the Seward Peninsula, and then also we have below 6,000 feet, some isolated moderate due to outflow, and we have considerable moderate over the Panhandle due to that weather system offshore. Well, that's your aviation forecast for today, and thanks for tuning in.
On March 11, 2011, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake off the Pacific coast of Japan generated a tsunami. This series of ocean waves sped towards the island nation, with waves reaching 24 feet high. The result was devastation and utter destruction. Towns were engulfed by water and swept away. Farmland was flooded. Tens of thousands of lives were lost. The National Police Agency reported damages to hundreds of roads, bridges, and more than 100,000 buildings. The surging water flooded rivers and destroyed harbors. In some areas along the coast, tsunami waves reached 6 miles inland. Tsunamis not only cause severe damage when they first strike land, but also as the water recedes back to sea. Tsunamis can inflict this type of damage because of some unique features. As tsunami waves travel across ocean basins, they may be as little as a few centimeters high, but they extend down to the ocean floor. This is different than traditional waves, which are only surface features. Tsunamis can also travel hundreds of miles per hour in the open ocean. As these waves approach a coast, the shallowing ocean floor slows the waves down and pushes the water mass upwards. The quicker the ocean floor transitions from deep to shallow, the greater potential for a higher wave height. So, tsunamis that experience this sudden shift into shallow water can have the height and momentum to pack a serious punch. Unfortunately, Japan found itself in this scenario. This image shows how abruptly the Japanese islands rise out of the ocean. Other coastal areas in the region have much more gradual slopes. The earthquake on March 11th was the most powerful known to hit Japan, and the tsunami it created had the necessary ingredients to make it such a deadly and destructive force. "80 miles east of Japan, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake rocks the ocean floor. This disturbance causes a transfer of energy from the seafloor to the ocean, generating a series of ocean waves, known as a tsunami. In about 20 minutes, waves strike the Japanese coastline. Other nations go on high alert because the tsunami will propagate or spread throughout the Pacific Ocean. As the tsunami radiates outward from Japan, it encounters a variety of ocean features, such as ridges and underwater volcanoes, which guide the tsunami and create a complex pattern of scattering and reflective waves. In 8 hours, the waves reach the Hawaiian Islands, and in 9.5 hours, they hit the west coast of the United States. In 16 hours, the tsunami reaches the Indian Ocean and New Zealand, and by 22 hours, the entire Pacific Ocean had been affected. The impact of a tsunami can be highly variable because of the complicated interactions with ocean features and coastline elements. Wave height and speed will differ from place to place. Since tsunamis can be hundreds of miles long and travel thousands of miles away from where they originated, they are considered a worldwide threat when they form. These are the sounds of a tsunami warning. They alert residents that a killer wave is about to strike. These sirens, however, are just a small part of the sophisticated warning systems that played a role in Japan and in the US during the Pacific Ocean tsunami in March 2011. Most tsunamis are generated by an undersea earthquake. Fortunately, Japan has one of the most advanced earthquake early warning systems in the world. It detects tremors, calculates the epicenter, and sends out warnings from over 1,000 seismographs scattered throughout the country. The Japan Meteorological Agency issues the warnings and sends alerts to television and radio channels, the internet, and mobile phone networks. When the earthquake struck 80 miles offshore, warnings were generated in about 3 seconds. The tsunami warnings came 3 minutes later. These take longer because more complex calculations are involved and must factor in ocean data. Since the first tsunami wave struck the coastline within 20 minutes, the advanced warning provided some residents with crucial minutes to reach a safe area. While the earthquake sent powerful tsunami waves westward toward Japan, the tsunami also propagated east into the Pacific Ocean. Here, warnings are issued by the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, operated by NOAA in Hawaii. NOAA maintains a large network of buoys with ocean floor sensors that are strategically positioned in the earthquake-prone zones of the Pacific. This system collects vital ocean data for tsunami forecasting. On March 11th, only 25 minutes after the earthquake struck, the first buoy station measured the tsunami and relayed information to Hawaii. Scientists used this data to run models and issue forecasts and warnings to nations throughout the Pacific. From there, local emergency managers decided what actions were appropriate to take for public safety. The earthquake and resulting tsunami devastated the Japanese coastline, causing damage that will take years to repair. While we can't prevent these forces of nature from happening, our early warning systems can help us prepare for the dangers headed our way.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the marine forecast section. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge, focusing on the northern locations first. In the Chukchi Sea, we do have quite a bit of ice coverage now, and it's going to continue to fill here for the next couple days. Also down in Norton Sound area, that is almost fully ice covered as well. And then as we move down the west coast of the state into southwest Alaska, we do have ice down into the Bristol Bay area, and we are starting to see some shore-fast ice in the Kuskokwim Bay area as well. Taking a look now in southeast Alaska for Thursday in the inside waters, Lynn Canal area, northerly winds 20 knots, becoming northeast 15 in the central areas, and then down in the southern areas, southeast 30 knots are expected. Out over the Gulf waters, southerly winds in the south at 40 knots, becoming easterly, and then dropping down to 25 to 30 knots in northern locations. For Friday out in the Gulf waters, easterly winds 15 knots up north, and then southeast winds 20 to 25 knots as we get to the more eastern locations. Inside waters, northerly winds 10 to 20 knots, getting stronger as we get closer towards Lynn Canal, and then becoming southeast 15 in the southern locations. For south central Alaska on Thursday out over the Gulf waters, up northeast to northerly winds 25 knots, becoming northwesterly winds 20 to 25 knots in the western Gulf. Prince William Sound, northeast winds 15 knots expected, and then in Cook Inlet, northerly winds 10 to 15 knots expected with 30 knots out of a northwesterly direction out of Kamishak Bay. For Friday in south central, Cook Inlet's going to see 10 to 25 knots out of a northeasterly direction, 25 knots also down west of the Barren Islands. Out over the Gulf waters, we are going to see primarily an easterly direction, 25 knots in the western locations, becoming 15 knots up north. Prince William Sound, northerly winds 10 knots are expected. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island on Thursday, western locations are going to see east to southeast winds of 40 knots with seas up to as high as 20 feet on the Pacific side. In Bristol Bay area, northeast winds 30 knots and then 20 knots out of an easterly direction on the southern side of the peninsula. Around Kodiak Island, lighter flow 10 to 15 knots northeasterly through Shelikof Strait and northwesterly on the east side of the island. On Friday, all flow becoming more northeast to easterly, 35 knots around Kodiak Island, 30 knots out of Bristol Bay, 40 to 45 knots on the Pacific side of the peninsula with seas up to as high as 26 feet, and then 35 knots north of Cold Bay. On Thursday for the Aleutian Islands, south to southeasterly winds from most of the islands, 45 knots by the eastern Aleutians, 15 knots in between the eastern and central Aleutians, and then 25 to 30 knots for the central Aleutian Islands. And then out by the western Aleutians, we're going to see circulation around a low pressure system, 30 knots out of the south on the east side of the low, and then northerly winds, 25 knots on the west side. For Friday, out by the western Aleutians, westerly winds, 25 knots, becoming more southerly by the central Aleutians, around 20 knots, and then 25 to 30 knots by the eastern Aleutians out of a more easterly direction. For the west coast of the state, primarily easterly flow with the exception of Norton Sound, which will see light northerly winds around 10 knots. St. Lawrence Island will be 30 knots, 35 to 40 knots around Nunavik Island, and easterly winds 50 knots for both St. Matthew Island and the Pribilof Islands, with seas up to as high as 29 feet west of St. Matthew Island. On Friday, continuing to see primarily easterly winds throughout the west coast, 25 knots up in Norton Sound, 40 knots by St. Lawrence Island, 30 knots by Nunavik Island, 25 knots by the Pribilof Islands, and 50 knots still for St. Matthew Island, with seas up to as high as 27 feet, again west of the island. Along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds 20 to 30 knots, strongest by the Beaufort Sea, becoming northerly down the west coast 15 to 25 knots, picking up closer towards the Bering Strait, and then south of the strait, easterly winds 30 knots. For Friday, along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds 20 to 30 knots expected, once again highest by the Beaufort Sea, becoming northeasterly down the northwest coastline at 20 to 25 knots, and then south of the Bering Strait, easterly winds 40 knots expected. For a recap of our weather for tonight, we have a complex low out by the Aleutian Islands, bringing a rain and snow mix to the islands, with some snow out ahead of this system for the central Bering Sea, as well as covering the Pribilof Islands area. Some stronger winds are also going to be associated out ahead of this front. Some lighter snow for the interior part of the state, extending down into south central Alaska, and then up along the Arctic coastline, where we'll also see some areas of fog. Low pressure out over the eastern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, going to bring a rain and snow mix to the Panhandle area, primarily rain at low-lying areas, with snow in higher elevations and areas farther to the north. As we move into Thursday, still going to see a rain-snow mix for the Panhandle area, and lighter snow for much of the interior and western part of the Arctic coastline. Still going to see some fog up there. Our front pushing through the Bering Sea is going to push more snow into the Pribilof Islands and closer towards the southwest coastline, with a mix of rain and snow for the Aleutians. Then finally on Friday, a new system coming up from the south, going to bring continued rain snow mix throughout the Aleutian Islands and much of the Bering Sea, and a snow line coming in through the Gulf of Alaska towards the eastern portions of the Kenai Peninsula, and a rain snow mix for the southeastern portions of the state, with some fog along the Arctic coastline.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.